I never thought my life would turn into the kind of story people whisper about. The kind that makes people stop and say, "Wait, how is that even possible?" Because according to every doctor we visited, my husband could never have children. And yet, 2 months ago I stood in my bathroom, staring at a pregnancy test with two bright pink lines. I was pregnant. But the truth behind that pregnancy was something I wasn't ready to face. Before I continue, take a second to like this video and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Your support really helps stories like mine reach more people. My name is Laura, and for 12 years I believed my marriage was perfect. Daniel and I met when I was 24. He was kind, calm, and the type of man who always made you feel safe. The kind of man who held doors open, remembered small details, and never raised his voice. We married after only 2 years of dating. Back then we had dreams like every couple. A small house, a quiet life, and children running through the hallways. But life has a strange way of rewriting plans. After our 3rd year of marriage, we started trying for a baby. At first we didn't worry. Everyone told us it sometimes takes time. Months passed. Then a year. Then 2. Every time my period came, Daniel would hug me and say, "It's okay. It will happen when the time is right." But I could see the disappointment hiding in his eyes. Eventually we decided to see a doctor. That was the beginning of a long journey filled with hospitals, tests, and uncomfortable conversations. I remember the day everything changed. We were sitting in a quiet office while the doctor looked down at Daniel's medical results. He took a deep breath before speaking. "I'm very sorry, but it appears Daniel is unable to have children naturally." The room felt silent. Daniel didn't say anything. He just nodded slowly. I reached for his hand, but it felt cold. On the drive home we barely spoke. That night I pretended to fall asleep early, but around midnight I heard something. Soft sounds coming from the bathroom. I quietly walked to the door and realized Daniel was crying. I had never seen my husband cry before. And that moment broke my heart. After that, something between us changed. Not our love, but our hope. We stopped talking about children. Friends around us started having babies. Family gatherings became painful. People would ask questions like, "So when are you two having kids?" Daniel would smile politely, but later that night he would sit quietly staring at the television without really watching it. Eventually we learned to live with the idea that our life would be different. Years passed. Our house stayed quiet. But we still had each other. At least, that's what I believed. Everything stayed normal until 2 months ago. It started with something small. I began feeling tired all the time. At first I blamed work. Then came the headaches. The dizziness. One morning I woke up feeling extremely nauseous. Daniel joked, "Maybe you're pregnant." We both laughed. Because that was impossible. But later that day, my best friend Emily said the exact same thing. "You should take a test just to be sure." I rolled my eyes. "Emily, you know Daniel can't have kids." She shrugged. Stranger things have happened. I didn't take her seriously. But that evening while shopping, I passed by the pharmacy aisle and saw a pregnancy test. Something inside me hesitated. Just to prove everyone wrong. I bought one. When I got home, Daniel was still at work. I walked into the bathroom feeling slightly ridiculous. 5 minutes later, my entire world changed. 2 pink lines. Clear. Bright. Impossible. I stared at the test, waiting for the lines to disappear. They didn't. My hands started shaking. This couldn't be happening. It made no sense. I sat down on the bathroom floor trying to breathe. Over and over I whispered to myself. This must be a mistake. Maybe the test was broken. Maybe I used it wrong. Maybe it was expired. But deep inside, a strange feeling told me the test was telling the truth. And that truth terrified me. Because if I was really pregnant, there was only one explanation people would believe. That I had cheated on my husband. But I hadn't. Not once. Daniel was the only man I had ever been with. So how could this be happening? I quickly hid the test in the trash just before I heard the front door open. Daniel walked in smiling like always. How was your day? I forced myself to act normal. Good, just tired. He kissed my forehead and went to change clothes. The entire evening I felt like I was living inside someone else's life. Every time Daniel spoke to me, guilt stabbed my chest. Not because I had done something wrong, but because I knew what that test meant. If I told him, it could destroy everything we had built together. Later that night I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the ceiling while Daniel slept beside me. Finally around 3 a.m. I quietly got out of bed and went back to the bathroom. The pregnancy test was still in the trash. I picked it up again. The 2 lines were still there. That's when I realized something even more frightening. If Daniel wasn't the father, then someone else had to be. And the worst part was, there was only one person in my life who could possibly explain it. The man who had come to fix our house 3 weeks earlier. I didn't sleep that night. Not even for a minute. I just kept staring at the ceiling while Daniel slept beside me, breathing slowly and peacefully, completely unaware that my entire world had just been turned upside down. Every few minutes I looked at him and felt a sharp pain in my chest. Daniel trusted me more than anyone else in the world. And now I was hiding something that could destroy him. But the truth was, I didn't even understand what was happening myself. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual. Daniel was still asleep. I quietly got out of bed and walked into the bathroom. The pregnancy test was still sitting on the counter where I had left it during the night. 2 pink lines. Still there. Still clear. Still impossible. My heart started racing again. Maybe the test was wrong. Maybe I needed to confirm it with another one. Within 20 minutes I was dressed and driving to the nearest pharmacy. The whole time my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I kept telling myself there was no way this could be real. When I reached the store, I bought 2 more pregnancy tests. The cashier smiled politely while scanning them, completely unaware that my entire life depended on the result. I drove back home quickly. Daniel had already left for work. The house was silent. My heart was beating so loudly I could almost hear it. I walked into the bathroom again. This time my hands were trembling even more. I followed the instructions carefully and then placed the test on the counter. 3 minutes. That's how long the instructions said to wait. 3 minutes had never felt so long in my life. I paced back and forth in the bathroom. 30 seconds passed. Then 1 minute. My breathing became heavier. When the timer on my phone finally beeped, I slowly looked down at the test. 2 lines. Again. I felt the air leave my lungs. There was no mistake now. No broken test. No misunderstanding. I was pregnant. I slid down against the bathroom wall and covered my face with my hands. How is this possible? I whispered to myself. Daniel had been tested multiple times. Every doctor said the same thing. He couldn't have children. So how could I be pregnant? My mind started searching desperately for answers. And then suddenly, a memory appeared. 3 weeks earlier. The day the plumber came to fix our kitchen sink. At first the memory seemed harmless. Daniel had called a repair company because our sink kept leaking. The plumber arrived around noon. He was a young man, maybe in his early 30s. Friendly. Polite. He worked for about 2 hours fixing the pipes under the sink. I remembered making him coffee while he worked. We talked casually for a few minutes. Nothing unusual. Nothing strange. Just normal conversation. But now, that memory was the only thing my mind could focus on. Because that day something strange had happened. Something I didn't understand at the time. After finishing the repair, the plumber had asked if he could quickly check the bathroom pipes as well. I agreed. While he was inside the bathroom, I suddenly felt extremely dizzy. The room started spinning. I barely remember what happened next. Everything became blurry. The last thing I remember clearly was sitting down on the couch feeling weak. When I woke up again, the plumber was standing near the door. He said I had fainted for a few seconds because of low blood pressure. I believed him. He even gave me a glass of water before leaving. At the time it didn't seem like a big deal. But now, thinking back on that moment made my stomach twist. Because I couldn't remember exactly what happened during those few minutes. And suddenly a terrifying thought entered my mind. What if something happened while I was unconscious? I immediately shook my head. No, that's crazy. There was no evidence. No reason to believe something like that. But the doubt had already planted itself inside my brain. The rest of the day felt like a nightmare. I went to work but couldn't focus on anything. My thoughts kept spinning in circles. There had to be another explanation. Maybe the doctors were wrong. Maybe Daniel actually could have children and the tests were mistaken. That possibility gave me a small sense of hope. Maybe this pregnancy was actually a miracle. Maybe the doctors had made a mistake all those years ago. When Daniel came home that evening, he found me sitting quietly at the kitchen table. "You look pale," he said with concern. "Are you okay?" I forced a small smile. "Just tired." He sat beside me and gently squeezed my hand. "You've been working too hard lately." I looked into his eyes and suddenly felt tears forming. Daniel loved me with complete honesty. And here I was sitting in front of him hiding something that could change our entire lives. Part of me wanted to tell him immediately. But another part of me was terrified. Because if I told him, he might believe the worst. That I had betrayed him. So instead I asked him something carefully. "Daniel, do you ever think the doctors might have been wrong?" He looked confused. "About what?" "About not being able to have kids." He sighed softly. "I wish they were wrong." Then he smiled sadly. "But we went to 3 different specialists, Laura. They all said the same thing." My chest tightened. There went my last hope. Later that night Daniel fell asleep quickly. But I stayed awake again. This time thinking about something else. If I was really pregnant, I needed proof. Proof of how it happened. And there was only one place I could start. The repair company. If that plumber had really done something to me that day, I needed to find him. The next morning I called the company and asked for the name of the technician who had visited our house 3 weeks earlier. The woman on the phone checked the records. "Yes," she said. "His name is Michael Carter." When I heard that name, a strange chill ran down my spine. Because for the first time since seeing the pregnancy test, I realized something terrifying. If my pregnancy wasn't Daniel's, then somewhere out there, Michael Carter might be the only person who knew the truth. The name Michael Carter stayed in my head the entire day. I wrote it down on a small piece of paper and kept staring at it like it might somehow give me answers. But a name alone meant nothing. I needed to see him. I needed to ask him what really happened that afternoon. Still, a part of me was terrified. What if I was wrong? What if nothing actually happened and I was just imagining things? And worse, what if something did happen? The thought made my stomach twist. That evening when Daniel came home, I tried to act normal again. But I could tell he noticed something was wrong. "You've been quiet lately," he said while we were eating dinner. "Is something bothering you?" I forced a small smile. "Just work stress." He looked at me carefully for a moment but didn't push further. Daniel had always respected my space. That was one of the reasons I loved him so much. But that same kindness now made the guilt inside me even heavier. After dinner he went to the living room to watch television. I stayed in the kitchen pretending to wash dishes. But really I was thinking. I had to find Michael Carter. And I had to do it without Daniel knowing. The next morning I called the repair company again. This time I asked something different. "Do you know where Michael Carter is working today?" I asked casually. The receptionist answered without hesitation. "Yes, he's scheduled for a job across town this afternoon." My heart started beating faster. "Could you give me the address?" I asked. She hesitated for a second but then said, "If you need additional service you can meet him there." She gave me the location. I wrote it down quickly. For the next few hours I kept staring at the clock. Part of me wanted to cancel the plan completely. But the other part knew I couldn't live with the uncertainty. At around 2 in the afternoon, I drove to the address she gave me. It was a quiet neighborhood. Small houses. Tree-lined streets. I parked my car down the road and waited. My hands were shaking slightly on the steering wheel. I kept asking myself the same question again and again. What am I going to say to him? "You might be the father of my baby?" It sounded insane. Almost an hour passed before I finally saw a white repair van pull up in front of the house. The logo on the side of the van was the same company Daniel had called. A tall man stepped out of the driver's seat. Even from a distance I recognized him immediately. Michael Carter. My heart started pounding harder. For a moment I almost drove away. But then I remembered the pregnancy test. The 2 pink lines. And suddenly I knew I had no choice. I stepped out of my car and slowly walked toward him. He was carrying a toolbox toward the front door when he noticed me approaching. At first he looked confused. But then his expression changed slightly. Like he recognized me. "Hi," I said nervously. He stared at me for a second before speaking. "You're Daniel's wife, right?" Hearing him say my husband's name made my chest tighten. "Yes." He gave a polite smile. "Is something wrong with the sink again?" For a moment I couldn't find the words. My throat felt dry. "No, the sink is fine." He looked even more confused now. "Then why are you here?" I took a deep breath. "There's something I need to ask you about the day you came to our house." His smile slowly disappeared. "What about it?" I felt my heart racing. "That day, when you were fixing the pipes." I fainted. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, you passed out for a few seconds." "I remember." I swallowed nervously. "Did anything happen while I was unconscious?" His eyes narrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" I forced myself to say the words. "Did you touch me?" For a second the street felt completely silent. Michael stared at me like he couldn't believe what he had just heard. Then suddenly he laughed. Not loudly, but enough to make my face burn with embarrassment. "Why would you ask something like that?" he said. I hesitated. Because, something strange has happened. He crossed his arms. What kind of strange thing? I looked around the street quickly to make sure no one was watching. Then I lowered my voice. I'm pregnant. The moment the words left my mouth, his expression changed completely. The small smile vanished. His eyes widened. And for a brief second, he looked genuinely shocked. You're pregnant, he repeated. I nodded slowly. And my husband can't have children. The silence between us suddenly felt heavy. Michael looked away toward the street, thinking. Then he ran a hand through his hair. That's impossible, he muttered. My chest tightened. Why? He looked back at me with a strange expression. Because nothing happened that day. His answer came quickly. Almost too quickly. And something about the way he said it made my instincts scream that he wasn't telling the whole truth. But before I could ask another question, he said something that made my entire body freeze. There's something you should know, he said quietly. And you're not going to like it. There's something you should know, Michael said quietly. And you're not going to like it. My heart started pounding again. For a moment I was afraid to ask the next question. But I needed answers. What do you mean? I asked slowly. Michael looked around the street like he was making sure nobody could hear us. Then he leaned a little closer and lowered his voice. The day I came to your house, you didn't just faint. A cold feeling ran through my body. What are you talking about? He sighed and rubbed the back of his neck nervously. You collapsed in the kitchen. When I found you, you were barely conscious. That's not what I remember, I said quickly. I remember sitting on the couch. That's because I helped you there, he replied. My mind tried to piece together the memory, but everything from that afternoon still felt blurry. What happened after that? I asked. Michael hesitated. For a moment it looked like he was debating whether to continue. Then he spoke again. You kept saying you felt dizzy and sick. I told you I could call an ambulance, but you refused. That part sounded vaguely familiar. So you gave me water and then left, I said. That's what I thought too, he replied. What do you mean you thought? He looked directly into my eyes. Because something strange happened before I left your house. My stomach tightened. What? Michael took a deep breath. While you were sitting on the couch, your phone started ringing. I frowned. My phone? He nodded. It kept ringing over and over. I thought maybe it was important, so I picked it up to give it to you. Okay, I said slowly. But when I answered it, the person on the other end thought I was someone else. My confusion grew. Someone else? Michael nodded again. The man on the phone said, Hey, I'm outside. The words sent a sudden chill through my body. Outside? I repeated. Yeah, Michael said. At first I thought maybe it was your husband, but the voice sounded younger. My heart started racing again. What happened next? Michael continued. I told him he had the wrong number, but before I could hang up, he said something weird. My throat felt dry. What did he say? Michael looked uneasy now. He said, Tell Laura I'll come back later then. The moment he said my name, my entire body froze. How did he know my name? I whispered. Michael shrugged. I assumed he was a friend of yours. But I knew immediately that something wasn't right. Because there was only one person who sometimes stopped by the house unexpectedly. Daniel's younger brother. Ethan. The thought made my chest tighten. Ethan had always been friendly with me. Sometimes too friendly. But I had never taken it seriously. He was family. Or at least, that's what I thought. What happened after the call? I asked quietly. Michael continued. I left your phone on the table and went back to finishing the sink repair. A few minutes later you said you were feeling better. I nodded slowly. That part matched what I remembered. So I packed my tools and left, he said. The street felt silent again. My mind was spinning with questions. If Ethan had been outside that day, why didn't he come inside? Why didn't he call again? And most importantly, why couldn't I remember any of it? Michael suddenly spoke again. Look, I don't know what's going on with your pregnancy, he said. But I swear to you, I never touched you. His voice sounded sincere. For the first time since seeing the pregnancy test, I started wondering if my suspicion about him had been completely wrong. But that only created another terrifying possibility. Because if Michael wasn't the father, and Daniel couldn't have children, then there was only one other man connected to that strange afternoon. Ethan. Daniel's brother. And the more I thought about it, the more a disturbing realization started forming in my mind. Because the last thing Ethan said to me before leaving our house weeks earlier was something I didn't understand at the time. But now those words echoed in my memory like a warning. He had smiled and said, "Don't worry, Laura, some surprises take time to appear." The drive home felt longer than usual. My mind was spinning with too many questions. Michael's words kept repeating inside my head. Tell Laura I'll come back later. If Ethan had really been outside the house that day, why didn't he come inside? And more importantly, why couldn't I remember anything about it? By the time I reached home, my hands were still trembling slightly. The house was quiet. Daniel wouldn't be back from work for another 2 hours. I walked into the living room and sat down on the couch. The same couch where I had fainted weeks earlier. I looked around the room slowly, trying to remember every detail from that day. But the memory still felt broken. Like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. Then suddenly another thought crossed my mind. My phone. Michael said Ethan had called me that day. If that was true, there should still be a record of the call. My heart started beating faster again as I grabbed my phone. I opened the call history and started scrolling back through the dates. Then I found it. 3 weeks earlier. 1 missed call. Ethan. My stomach tightened. So Michael wasn't lying. Ethan really had called that day. But something else caught my attention. It wasn't just one call. There were 3 calls. 3 missed calls within 10 minutes. And then, 1 call that had been answered. My hands started shaking again. Because I knew I hadn't answered that call. Michael must have picked up the phone when I fainted. But then another disturbing question appeared in my mind. What happened after that? I stared at the call log for a long time. Part of me wanted to call Ethan immediately and ask him everything. But another part of me was afraid of what he might say. Instead, I decided to do something else. I went upstairs to the bedroom and opened the closet. Inside a small box were some old documents and medical reports from the years Daniel and I spent trying to have a baby. I pulled out the folder slowly. Inside were test results, prescriptions, and letters from doctors. The one report I was looking for was near the bottom. Daniel's fertility test. I had read it many times before, but now I studied every line carefully. The result was clear. 0 sperm count. The doctor had even written a note explaining that natural pregnancy would be extremely unlikely. Which meant one thing. Daniel truly couldn't be the father. That realization made my chest feel heavy. Because if Daniel wasn't the father, and Michael wasn't the father, then the only remaining possibility was Ethan. Daniel's younger brother. Just thinking about it made me feel sick. Ethan was 4 years younger than Daniel. He had always been charming and confident. The kind of man who joked a lot and never seemed to take life too seriously. When Daniel and I first got married, Ethan used to visit often. Sometimes he would bring groceries or help Daniel fix things around the house. At first I appreciated his kindness. But after a few years I started noticing something strange. The way he looked at me sometimes. It wasn't the way a brother-in-law should look at someone. Once, during a family barbecue, he had said something that made me uncomfortable. Daniel had gone inside to answer a phone call. Ethan leaned toward me and smiled. "You know," he said quietly, "if Daniel doesn't give you kids, someone else might." At the time I thought he was just making a stupid joke. I ignored it. But now, remembering those words sent a cold shiver down my spine. Suddenly my phone vibrated in my hand. The sound made me jump. When I looked at the screen, my heart almost stopped. It was a message. From Ethan. My fingers felt frozen as I opened it. The message was short. But it made my blood run cold. It said, "Hey Laura. We need to talk about what happened that day." My heart started pounding the moment I read Ethan's message. We need to talk about what happened that day. The words felt heavy. Almost threatening. For a moment I just stared at the screen, trying to understand what he meant. What happened that day? Did he mean the day I fainted? Or something else? My fingers hovered over the phone as I tried to decide whether to reply. Part of me wanted to ignore the message completely. But another part knew that avoiding him wouldn't solve anything. If Ethan knew something about that afternoon, I needed to hear it. I typed a short reply. "What are you talking about?" The typing bubble appeared almost immediately. That meant he had been waiting for my response. A few seconds later another message arrived. "Not over text. We should talk in person." My stomach tightened. Why in person? What could he possibly say that couldn't be written in a message? Before I could answer, another message appeared. "Daniel doesn't know, right?" Those 4 words made my hands go cold. How did he know Daniel didn't know? Unless Ethan already knew about the pregnancy. I felt a sudden wave of fear. Had he somehow found out? Or had he known all along? I took a deep breath and typed again. "Know about what?" There was a pause this time. Almost a full minute passed before he responded. Then his message finally appeared. "About the baby." The phone nearly slipped from my hands. My heart was racing so fast it felt like I couldn't breathe. How could he possibly know? I hadn't told anyone. Not even Daniel. My mind started searching desperately for explanations. Maybe he was just guessing. Maybe he had noticed something strange about me recently. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a guess. My fingers trembled as I typed my next message. "How do you know about that?" This time the reply came instantly. "Because I was there." The words felt like a punch to my chest. For a moment I couldn't even move. I was there. What did that mean? There was only one way to find out. I typed one final message. "Where do you want to meet?" 3 dots appeared on the screen again. Then his reply came. "The small cafe near the river. Tonight. 7 p.m. I stared at the message for several seconds. The cafe he mentioned was only 15 minutes from our house. It was quiet. Almost always empty in the evenings. Which meant Ethan had chosen it for a reason. Privacy. I checked the time. It was already 4:30 p.m. Daniel would be home in about an hour. I quickly locked my phone and sat on the couch again. My heart was still racing. Everything was happening too fast. 3 weeks ago my life had been normal. Now I was secretly pregnant and about to meet my husband's brother to talk about something I couldn't even remember. When Daniel came home that evening, he greeted me the same way he always did. A gentle kiss on the forehead. "How was your day?" he asked. "Fine," I replied quickly. But I avoided looking directly into his eyes. The guilt inside me had grown even heavier. Daniel deserved honesty. He deserved to know what was happening. But until I understood the truth myself, I couldn't risk destroying our marriage with half answers. During dinner I barely touched my food. Daniel noticed immediately. "You're not eating," he said with concern. "I'm just not very hungry." He studied my face for a moment. "Are you feeling sick again?" That question made my stomach twist. I forced a small smile. "I think it's just stress." After dinner I stood up and grabbed my jacket. Daniel looked surprised. "Going somewhere?" "Yes," I said casually. "Emily asked me to meet her for coffee." The lie came out easier than I expected. Daniel nodded. "Okay. Drive safe." I grabbed my keys and left the house quickly before my conscience could stop me. The drive to the cafe felt longer than usual. Every red light made my anxiety worse. My mind kept imagining different possibilities. What if Ethan confessed something terrible? What if he admitted that he had taken advantage of me when I fainted? But another possibility scared me even more. What if I had done something willingly, and simply couldn't remember it? By the time I reached the cafe, the sun was already setting. The sky had turned dark orange. My hands felt cold as I parked the car. Through the window I could already see Ethan sitting at one of the tables. He looked calm. Too calm. Like someone who already knew the outcome of a conversation. I walked inside slowly. The cafe was almost empty. Only one other couple sat near the window. Ethan looked up as soon as I approached. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he gave a small, nervous smile. "Hi, Laura." I sat down across from him. My heart was beating loudly in my ears. "You said you were there that day," I said immediately. His expression became serious. "Yes." "Then start talking," I said. "What happened in my house?" Ethan looked down at the table for a moment. Then he sighed heavily. "When I came to your house that afternoon," he said quietly, "the plumber had already left." My mind froze. "That's impossible," I said quickly. "He told me you called while he was still there." Ethan shook his head. "I did call. But when I arrived, the house was completely silent." A cold feeling spread through my chest. "What do you mean?" Ethan looked up at me slowly. And the next words he spoke made my entire body go numb. "I found you unconscious in the living room." I froze, unable to breathe. Ethan's words hung in the air like a dark shadow. "I found you unconscious in the living room." My mind raced. Unconscious? I had thought I fainted in the kitchen, but now he was saying the living room. The memory felt fragmented, like pieces of glass scattered across my brain. What happened then?" I managed to whisper, my voice trembling. Ethan looked me straight in the eyes, his expression unreadable. I didn't touch you," he said slowly, almost painfully. I blinked, trying to process. "Then, what do you mean?" I asked. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling deeply. "When I saw you there, on the floor." I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I gripped the edge of the table, my nails digging into the wood. "You were moving. Like you were trying to get up, but couldn't. And then I accidentally caused something." My stomach dropped. "What?" He swallowed hard. I kissed you. I didn't mean to, I swear. You were unconscious for a moment, and it just happened. I froze. Then I left. My mind went blank. What did he just say? 2 months of confusion, fear, and doubt suddenly slammed into me at once. I had a baby growing inside me. And he had just admitted something terrifying. I felt a scream rising in my throat, but I swallowed it. I didn't. Daniel, my words failed me. Ethan leaned back, guilt etched all over his face. I never wanted this. I never thought it would happen. I thought it was just a moment, nothing real. But now, his voice trailed off. My hands trembled. I had been keeping this pregnancy a secret. Daniel had no idea. And now, the man I had trusted, my husband's brother, was confessing that he could be the reason I was pregnant. I looked around the empty cafe, suddenly feeling exposed, vulnerable. How could this happen? I whispered. Ethan's eyes filled with remorse. I don't know, he admitted. But we need to figure out what to do. Before anyone finds out. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my racing heart. Daniel. My husband. He couldn't have children. And now? I wasn't sure who the father of my child really was. My mind flashed back to the pregnancy test. The two bright lines staring back at me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted answers. But there was no running from this. Not now. Ethan leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. You have to promise me, you won't say anything yet. Not to Daniel. Not to anyone. I nodded slowly, even though my stomach twisted in knots. Promise me, he repeated. I nodded again, feeling like my entire life was unraveling in front of me. For the first time, I realized, the next months of my life were going to be a nightmare. A secret I couldn't share. A baby whose father might never be known. And a husband I loved, who would never understand what had truly happened. I left the cafe that night feeling colder than I ever had. The streets were quiet, the city lights flickering in the distance. I tried to breathe, to calm myself. But the truth was clear. Nothing would ever be the same. And deep inside, I was terrified. Because now I understood the weight of that pregnancy test. The future I had imagined with Daniel, it was gone. And a new, dark reality had taken its place. The night after the cafe meeting, I couldn't sleep. Not even a single minute. Every thought, every word Ethan had said, circled endlessly in my mind. I kept picturing his eyes, his face full of guilt, the way he admitted everything. My hands were cold. My heart raced like I had run a marathon. I tried to lie down, tried to close my eyes, but every time I did, the memory of that afternoon replayed in my mind. I was pregnant. And I didn't know who the father was. Daniel, my husband, the man I loved more than anything in this world, could never have children. Yet there I was, carrying a life that might not even belong to him. I felt sick, both physically and emotionally. I tried to convince myself it could be a mistake. A miracle, perhaps, or some unexplained medical anomaly. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Ethan's confession had sealed the reality. He might have been involved in my pregnancy, whether intentional or accidental, I couldn't yet determine. I paced the living room that night, staring at the shadows cast by the dim streetlights outside. What had I gotten myself into? What had happened during those few minutes when I fainted? And most terrifying of all, how was I going to face Daniel? The next morning, Daniel left for work as usual, completely unaware of the storm brewing in my mind. I stayed home, trying to calm myself. I opened my laptop and started researching everything I could about memory loss, fainting, and pregnancies with unknown paternity. The more I read, the more anxious I became. Nothing could give me a clear answer. Every scenario I considered seemed darker than the last. By midday, my phone buzzed. It was Ethan. "We need to meet again. It's urgent." I stared at the message for several minutes, my chest tightening. Urgent. What could possibly be urgent? I typed back carefully. Where? The same cafe. Tonight. I didn't know whether to go. Part of me wanted to run. Part of me wanted answers. The day dragged on. I tried to act normal, but even Emily, my best friend, noticed something was off. "Laura, are you okay?" she asked during our lunch call. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just stressed with work." But the lie felt hollow in my own ears. Every hour I counted the minutes until I could leave the house without Daniel noticing. Finally, evening came. I told Daniel I was going to meet Emily again. He didn't question me this time. I drove to the cafe, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The sky had turned dark, clouds blotting out most of the city lights. I parked down the street, trying to calm my thoughts. When I entered the cafe, Ethan was already there. He looked even more tense than the night before. "Laura," he said quietly, standing up. "Sit," I replied, my voice shaking slightly. He looked around nervously before sitting. "I don't have much time," he said. "What do you mean?" I asked. "There are things you need to know," he whispered. I leaned forward, trying to hear every word. "I didn't plan this, none of it. But someone else was there that day." My eyes widened. "Someone else?" I repeated, feeling my chest tighten. "Yes," he said. "The plumber, he didn't just leave when he said he did. There was a second person in the house, watching everything. I only noticed because of the call I received while I was there. And that person is someone very close to you." My mind raced. Daniel? Ethan? Who else could it be? "You're saying someone else was in the house?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Yes," Ethan said. "And that person might have caused your pregnancy. Not me, not the plumber, someone else entirely." I felt my stomach drop. I tried to comprehend the weight of what he was saying. Someone else. And all this time, I had been terrified it was Ethan. But it wasn't him. Then who? Ethan leaned closer, his voice trembling. "It's Daniel." I froze. "No," I whispered. "Yes," he said quietly. "The doctors were wrong. The tests were wrong. You're pregnant, and Daniel, he's the father. But there's a twist. You need to be very careful, Laura. This pregnancy, it will change everything." I couldn't breathe. My thoughts were chaotic. Daniel, the man I had loved, the man I trusted, he was the father? All my fears about Ethan, Michael, the cafe, they were wrong. But why did it feel so complicated? Ethan sighed, running a hand over his face. "You need to stay calm. Don't tell Daniel anything yet. You need to let things unfold. And, watch who you trust." I left the cafe that night feeling numb. The city streets blurred past me as I drove home. I couldn't stop thinking. If Daniel was the father, then the years of struggle, the fear, the secrets, were based on a lie. But who had lied? The doctors? Or fate itself? I reached home, my hands shaking. Daniel was already asleep, oblivious to everything. I looked at him, the man I loved, the man who couldn't have children, or so I thought, and I realized my life was about to change in ways I could never imagine. This pregnancy, this secret, it was just the beginning. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My mind was still replaying Ethan's words from last night. Daniel was lying next to me, peaceful, unaware of the storm raging in my thoughts. I stared at him for a long time. Could it really be him? The thought that Daniel might be the father filled me with a mix of relief and terror. Relief, because Ethan and Michael were not responsible. And terror, because it meant that something about the medical tests had been wrong all along. I got out of bed quietly and went to the kitchen, my hands trembling as I poured myself a cup of coffee. I needed clarity. I needed answers. I opened my laptop and began reviewing the medical files I had kept over the years. Fertility tests, ultrasounds, doctor notes, everything. Every time I thought I had a piece of the puzzle, another question appeared. How could Daniel, whose tests were conclusive, be the father? And why did Ethan seem so scared, so desperate to protect me from something I didn't fully understand? The clock ticked loudly as I sat there, reviewing the records again. It was then that I remembered a conversation I had with Dr. Walters, our reproductive specialist, months ago. I had asked her why some couples experience miracle pregnancies even when the tests say it's impossible. She had said something that now felt eerily relevant. Laura, sometimes the body defies explanation. Rarely, very rarely, a man thought to be infertile can still conceive. But it's almost miraculous. Could this be one of those miracles? Or was there something else, something no one had told me? I glanced at the clock again. Daniel would be home in a few hours. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to talk to Ethan again, to understand everything before it escalated. By mid-afternoon, I drove back to the cafe. It was quiet again, the same dimly lit corner where we had met last night. Ethan was already there, pacing. His expression was tense, almost desperate. Laura, he said as soon as I sat down, we don't have much time. You need to understand something before Daniel notices anything. I nodded, my hands folded tightly on the table. Explain, I said firmly. He took a deep breath and started. There's something the doctors didn't tell you. Something they overlooked. Daniel's fertility tests, they were mostly accurate, yes, but not perfect. There was a margin for error. My stomach tightened. You mean, I started. Yes, he said. Daniel can have children, but it's extremely rare. That day, somehow, it happened. I stared at him, disbelief written all over my face. So, it's him? Yes, Ethan replied softly. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by fear. What about the plumber? I asked, my voice trembling. Ethan shook his head. Michael Carter didn't do anything. You're safe there. But the problem is this. Ethan lowered his voice. If Daniel ever finds out about what you've learned, things could get complicated. You need to be careful who you tell. My mind spun. I had been terrified of the wrong people this whole time. Daniel, my husband, was innocent. And now I realized everything had been a misunderstanding that spiraled out of control. Ethan reached across the table, his hand brushing mine lightly. I know this is hard, he said softly. But you need to be careful. Secrets like this, they have a way of destroying everything if revealed at the wrong time. I nodded slowly, trying to process everything. It was a lot to take in. The fear, the confusion, the relief, all mixed together in a storm I couldn't escape. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small sense of clarity. Daniel was the father. But the secret, the truth, was still mine to carry alone. I left the cafe that evening feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. Every streetlight, every shadow seemed to whisper the same warning. Be careful. One wrong move and everything could fall apart. As I drove home, I realized that my life had changed forever. This pregnancy was no longer just about me. It was about trust, secrecy, and the delicate balance between love and betrayal. And deep down, I knew one thing for certain. The next few months were going to be the hardest of my life. The days that followed were some of the most intense of my life. Every moment felt like walking on a tightrope, balancing between relief, fear, and anticipation. Daniel was completely unaware of the storm that had brewed around me. I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth, not yet. And Ethan's warnings echoed in my mind constantly. Secrets like this, they have a way of destroying everything if revealed at the wrong time. I went about my daily life, pretending everything was normal. I cooked, cleaned, and smiled for Daniel, hiding the secret that consumed me from within. But every time I looked down at the growing curve of my stomach, reality struck me like lightning. My life had changed forever. I was carrying Daniel's child, but the journey here had been tangled with fear, doubt, and moments I didn't fully understand. One evening, as I sat in the living room after Daniel had gone to sleep, my phone buzzed. It was Ethan. "We need to meet. It's urgent. I have new information." My heart skipped a beat. What could possibly be more urgent than what he had already told me? I typed back quickly. "Where?" "The old bridge near the river. Tonight. 10 p.m. I felt a chill run down my spine. The old bridge was isolated, quiet, and the kind of place where secrets could be shared, or disasters could happen. I told Daniel I was going to meet Emily for late coffee, and he didn't question me this time. The drive to the bridge was tense. Every red light, every shadow of passing cars made me jump. When I arrived, Ethan was already there, pacing nervously. As I approached, he stopped and looked me straight in the eyes. "You need to understand the full truth," he said, his voice low and serious. I nodded, gripping my jacket tightly. He motioned for me to sit on the railing beside him. "Laura, there's more than just the pregnancy. That day, someone else was involved. Someone who shouldn't have been." I felt my stomach drop. "Who?" I whispered. Ethan swallowed hard. "You remember the plumber?" I nodded slowly. "Well, he wasn't alone. Someone tipped him off about you. Someone wanted to make sure you were vulnerable that afternoon." My heart started pounding. "What? Who?" Ethan looked around as if afraid someone might be watching. "Daniel's colleague, someone who's obsessed with your family. Someone who wanted the impossible to happen, and they took advantage of the situation." My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you saying someone else was involved in my pregnancy?" I asked shakily. Ethan nodded gravely. "Yes. But you need to know. Daniel had nothing to do with it. Your child is his. But the circumstances were manipulated. That day, someone was watching, waiting, trying to make chaos." I sank against the railing, my hands trembling. All the fear, the confusion, the sleepless nights, it suddenly made sense. It wasn't Ethan. It wasn't Michael. It was a scheme, orchestrated to make me question everything, to make me doubt Daniel. And for a moment, I felt like my entire life had been a lie. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on mine. "I know it's hard to take in. But you're strong. You've handled every moment with courage. And now, you need to protect your family. Keep Daniel safe. Keep your child safe. And don't let anyone manipulate this further." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "Thank you," I whispered. We stayed there for a long moment, looking at the dark water flowing beneath the bridge. The silence was heavy but calming at the same time. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Yes, the road ahead would be complicated. Yes, there would be challenges, fears, and secrets. But I had survived the impossible. I had discovered the truth. And now, I could face the future. Daniel would be a father. I would carry his child. And no matter the manipulations, the lies, or the fear, love would prevail. I took a deep breath, letting the night air fill my lungs. The journey wasn't over. There would be hurdles. There would be moments of doubt. But I had the truth now. And that truth was enough to keep moving forward. As I walked back to my car, I realized the nightmare was finally ending. The secret I carried inside me would one day be revealed. But until then, I would protect it. I would protect my family. And I would embrace the life growing inside me with courage, hope, and love. The world had tested me, broken me, and thrown me into chaos. But I had survived. And that was only the beginning of a new chapter.